There's a ton of internationals at the Division One and the highest end Division Two, and I think we're still in a predicament in the United States where those players are, predominantly smarter than the North American player. At the end of the day, they understand how to get a result. They understand how to manage a game, and they understand how to approach a game.
What do you think are the differences between like a D1, D2, D3, and the IA JUCO player? Do you see big differences?
At the highest level, Division One, there's a physicality difference that I don't think is unparalleled to anywhere else. I think the tactical knowledge, in my opinion, is the biggest difference. At the end of the day, I think players are just smarter at the Division One level. So many players in the United States are underdeveloped in certain aspects, and they go into college and, they're a level behind. I want to go to UCLA. I want to go to Duke. Whatever it is, and reality is 99.99% aren't at the level. And even the few that are, maybe they are able to get into the door. But we know how it is. You get there and you're like, oh, I'm not playing. I'm not happy again.
If I want to get a college soccer offer, what questions should I ask?
I think it's impossible. I think that's where a lot of people make mistakes. So before you accumulate any knowledge on the process, to make decisions on how to get there.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Select Generation podcast. Today, I'm super excited. It's going to be a really, really interesting episode. We got Cullen Freeman with us. He's joining us as a really interesting guest. I think Cullen's got a good story. So he actually operates a recruiting agency, a college soccer placement agency. He's a technical analyst, he'll get into his background, but he's currently with Colorado Rapids of MLS Next Pro. He's played or is playing college soccer. He's played USL2. He has got a really interesting story, really an interesting background, and I think he can give a really good insight into players that are listening to this and parents also about the pro game, the college game, what you need to be doing, some good insights. And I'm excited just to ask him a bunch of questions and have a conversation. So, Cullen, I appreciate your time. And yeah, if you just want to give a quick intro, quick background about yourself, that would be awesome.
Yeah, first off, pleasure to be on this. I've listened to a few episodes recently and it's fantastic content. So a pleasure to be on it. But yeah, as you mentioned there, my background is a little bit unique right now and I do have a lot going on. Still do play in college, played MSU Denver and the Rocky Mountain Athletic Association at the Division II level, been at the Division I level, won a national title at the Division II level as well. So definitely some very unique playing experiences. I'm currently working in the pro game, as you mentioned, with Colorado Rapids 2 and MLS Next Pro. Gives a lot of unique experiences there as well. And then also operate, as you said, a recruitment agency that works in a variety of different areas. So yeah, I have a lot of knowledge right now and a lot of unique pathways that I'm excited to share.
Amazing. Awesome. So Cullen, this is funny because I remember being on your podcast like 2-3 years ago when you started one of you, I think it was Off the Ball Pathways. And I remember I was like, damn, these guys are like really young and motivated and they're asking really good questions. And I was really curious about what you were doing. And we had our podcast at the time, but I think I'd probably done about 10 episodes. So someone that's kind of listening to this that is wondering, because obviously you've got like a playing background and you've got a coaching background, MLS Next Pro. You've had a lot of different experiences in football. Why do you think that your opinion or your content is important? Like from the experiences that you've had, the things that you've gone through in football, why is your story and your perspective for a North American player that's 16 to 18, why is your perspective important to that player or to that family?
Yeah, first off, that's a great question. And I remember interviewing you as well. So that's kind of funny how it comes full circle here. But I think the biggest thing for myself is I think my story is very relatable in a lot of ways. Obviously I've been given some opportunities recently that are fantastic, but I think to begin with, like I wasn't a special player by any means coming out. Like I was, I had some opportunities with Rapids Academy growing up, but I wasn't a full-time academy player. I was playing at the time, like there was no ECNL or anything like that when I was coming through. So I was playing at the highest level in Colorado. There was non-academy, but it wasn't an incredibly high level. And now obviously I'm playing at a high level in the college game. I've had some amazing experiences in that aspect. And then obviously in the involvement in the pro game. And I think I've also been able to accumulate a lot of knowledge in, different capacities. I think obviously as a player, I've been around some fantastic coaches. Coaches have had amazing success. They've won Division I national titles, Division II national titles, sent so many guys on the professional level. And then as a coach, I truly believe I'm surrounded by maybe the best staff at the MLS Next Pro level. Everyone I speak to raves about just the knowledge and all the leadership they provide. And then also some fantastic people just at the club at the Colorado Rapids. There's some people that have been at unbelievably high levels as both a player and now on kind of the business side. So I think that's what makes it very unique in a lot of ways. I've been able to accumulate all this knowledge coming from a very, I guess, relatable background. And then I have so many different perspectives now. And, I've also been abroad, gained experience in that sense. But I think it's the multitude of different perspectives that really would allow me to provide a lot of knowledge to a North American player.
Amazing, amazing. So you've been involved at the collegiate level, and then obviously now you're working kind of placing players in the NCAA. What do you think are the differences? And I've been speaking about this a lot. We did a graphic which was like the college soccer pyramid, and it was like D3, D2, D1, NAIA, JUCO in there. What do you think are the differences between like a D1, D2, D3, NAIA, JUCO player? Do you see big differences?
It depends. Obviously, I mean, there are levels that I think overlap very much. I think the highest end of Division 2 is very similar to the Division 1 level. At my school, MSU Denver, we played DU in the spring, and for long periods of the match, it was very even. We lost 2-0 at the end of the day, but when I was at Franklin Pierce, for example, we were unbelievable that season. I think we would have beat pretty much anyone outside maybe the top 30 Division 1 programs this year. I mean, I think at the highest level, Division 1, there's a physicality difference that I don't think is unparalleled to anywhere else. I think you see the game; it's a lot more physical, in my opinion, at Division 1 level. Everyone's more athletic. They're faster. I think the tactical knowledge, in my opinion, is the biggest difference between each level. Progressing from NAIA to JUCO to D3 to Division 1 to Division 2. At the end of the day, I think players are just smarter at the Division 1 level, especially at the highest end. And I think nowadays you see, as you know, there's a ton of internationals at the Division 1 and the highest end Division 2. And I think we're still in a predicament in the United States where those players are, predominantly smarter than the North American player at the end of the day. They understand how to get a result. They understand how to manage a game. They understand how to approach a game. And, in my opinion, that's still the biggest difference between the average North American player and a player from overseas or something like that. So, I mean, I think skill wise, there is a difference, obviously, as you progress up the level. I don't think it's drastic, but I think it's, the decision making, the tactical knowledge, and then obviously there's a bit of a physicality difference as you progress up to the highest levels.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Really good insight. So transitioning from like player to analyst, what, why did you want to become an analyst at Colorado Rapids? Like, was it you really liked that? Was it that you're good at it? Was it you knew someone? Like, how do you go from being a college athlete to then getting a job at an MLS Next Pro side?
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating question, especially because it's happened, I think, very quickly by industry standards. I think for me, it all started about a year ago when I was leaving Bryant University. I tore a bunch of ligaments in my knee at the time, and it made me take a step back for the first time in my career because one, obviously, I was leaving a program that was top 25 in the country at the time. It was an incredibly difficult decision, and I was doing it, seeking out opportunities to kind of enjoy my football for the final period of my career. But I was kind of left in a place where I didn't know what was next. And I was fortunate enough to be around some incredible people at early stages of my career that really improved my game understanding and tactical IQ. And I knew, in reality, probably my ceiling in that aspect of the game was always higher. Um, so in that period, I sought out opportunities doing just kind of freelance work at the USL 2 level. Was trying to learn, speak to as many people as possible, and kind of improve my knowledge in as quick of a time period as I could. And was able to work as kind of a player assistant at MSU Denver while I recovered from a knee injury. And again, that gave me great experience in being able to one work with players on a daily basis on opponent scouting, what we can do better as well. And then I continued to kind of seek out freelance work, kind of try to showcase my work as much as I could. And, I was able to accumulate through, obviously my work at Kickball Pod and just, being able to be involved in the industry, a lot of connections with a lot of different people. And really just seeking out opportunities at the end of the day to continue to further my knowledge and see, if I always felt like I belonged at the professional level. I had the knowledge, the game IQ to do it. And, was always kind of trying to seek out opportunities and also, test myself, see if that was the case. And, obviously I've grown up in Colorado. I know a lot of people within the Rapids organization, and an opportunity came up where they were looking for a position at the club. And, obviously that helped me get a foot in the door in terms of obviously presenting myself in an interview like process and everything like that. But I had to go through multiple interviews in the process. They were looking for one person, and I think 50 to 100 people applied. So it was no given at the end of the day. Obviously, they knew who I was, and I had some connections, but I just continued to try to put my best foot forward, showcase my abilities at the time and what I was continuing to try to learn. And fortunately enough, it worked out, and it's been a fantastic opportunity since.
Interesting, because I feel like you've been exposed to a lot of different things. Obviously, you had your podcast, you started off the ball, you've obviously played college soccer, you've been involved in the Rapids. Like, have you always been someone that you can't really just relax and be comfortable? Like, do you always like new things or opportunities? Are you really like you like networking and meeting people? Like, did you grow up in an environment where you kind of were always working or doing something, or do you just enjoy opportunities? Like, what's driving you? Like, what's your mission? What's your goal?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, it's kind of evolved. Like I grew up in a pretty affluent place, I'll be honest. And I grew up in a place where I was busy growing up. I played multiple sports and obviously played football at a high level growing up, but I wouldn't say I was like a busy person growing up. Like I wasn't, always seeking to push myself to the next level or anything like that. And then, I graduated during COVID. So when I was 18, I moved to Costa Rica to play down there, and that was probably the greatest experience of my life because I was incredibly uncomfortable the entire time I was down there. I was down there for 3 months playing at a second division level down there, and I'll be honest, wanted to go home almost every single day because I miss my friends, I miss my family, and everything like that. And I kind of forced myself to stay. And it was really probably the greatest decision I ever made because it was really the first time I truly pushed myself outside my comfort zone, and I learned to crave that over time. I learned to always look to seek that out, and it was the same thing when I went abroad to Spain. And I think for myself, I've always been a person that kind of what I describe as has like a humble confidence. And, as I continued to kind of progress and push myself outside my comfort zone, I realized I enjoyed it. But I, looked around and I always just became to realize I wanted more with my life. I wanted to, be at the highest levels. And really enjoy, pushing myself to the maximum every single day and seeing what I'm capable of. And I think more than anything else, that's what drives me. I think even now looking like a year ago about this time or even a little bit beyond that, like I never would have imagined, what my life looks like now. And it's just, I think you kind of hit it there kind of in the question, but, I am always looking to network. I'm always looking to meet new people, but a lot of it is always just looking to learn and just see what levels I can reach at the end of the day. I want to help people along the way and kind of be able to allow them to achieve their dreams. But I think more than anything else, it's just I want to achieve everything at the end of the day. I'm an incredibly ambitious person and also just see what I'm capable of along the way.
It's interesting because I think that the environments that you've been exposed to probably have helped you with that. And I speak to a lot of players, I'm sure you do as well. And, they want to be comfortable. They want to go to a school close to their home. They want to only play Division 1 schools. And I mean, you're a prime example. Like you went to Costa Rica, you went to Spain, you went to New Hampshire, you transferred, you're in Denver now. Like you've gone to all of these different places. Maybe you're not playing at a professional level, but you're competing at a really good level. You've started your own recruitment service. You've got a job at an MLS Next Pro team. Like your experiences going out of your comfort zone and pushing you. I mean, I don't know how old you are, but I'm sure that you're a lot further ahead than a lot of people your age because you've had these experiences and you can put these things on your resume, right? So if you're speaking to a player now that is asking you, yeah, but I'm not sure, like I'm not sure about going to this school out of state. I live in California. I don't want to go to school in Florida, or I'm not sure about going in Spain, in Costa Rica. How important do you think going out of your comfort zone's been for your development as a person?
Honestly, personally, think it's been everything. I think you really can't test yourself as a human being within your comfort zone to a point. And, I'm not saying in a sense that like you have to go outside your comfort zone. You have to put yourself in a situation that maybe might not be right because there are times when situations are outside your comfort zone where, they maybe actually don't help you develop as, a footballer or overall as a person. But I think you should always look to seek out something that is challenging, whether that be just going away from home or pushing yourself to the highest level. And I always try to advocate that for any player I'm speaking to, whether it's pushing to a new level or just whatever capacity, just because, you learn so much about yourself in those moments. You learn how mentally tough you are. And I think you also gain a sense of confidence because I don't think, you can really gain true confidence staying in your comfort zone because you know deep down that you're comfortable in that capacity. You're not testing yourself. You're not seeing what you're made of. And, I think it's not something that comes easy either. Like, like I said, speaking upon Costa Rica and, even at points in Spain when I wasn't, playing or, had that much stuff going on around me, like, you're not enjoying it on a daily basis. And I think that's really hard for people because it's like, you know, one, you are away from home, you don't have a ton of going on or whatever. It's an uncomfortable living situation because you're not used to it. And also you're not enjoying what you are supposed to have going on across the pitch. But I think those are the moments that are so key because over time you gain that sense of confidence of, I'm doing something I don't want to do every single day and I'm still doing it well. I'm still doing it to the best capacity possible. And I think that's the only way you develop as a human being is you gain that sense of confidence, you gain that sense of ability of I can do something I don't want to do and still do it well. And I think that translates to every aspect of life at the end of the day.
Interesting, interesting, really good. Really, really good, Kellen. I love speaking to people like yourself because I think it's really interesting to kind of get. Obviously, we talked a lot of people on here about like football and like tips for recruiting and being a pro and stuff. But I think it's all interesting also to see the other side. Like I feel like I'm similar to yourself. Like I'm still learning a lot, and I'm always out my trying to get out of my comfort zone and do different things and feel challenged. And I think hearing what you're saying is really reassuring that like it's not going to be a linear line. Like there's a lot of things that you're going to have to do, and that's probably the reason why you have success at the end of it because you've done things that other people haven't do. And I wanted to talk to you about building off the ball because I know you started your podcast, then you started your recruitment service. Um, I've spoke a lot on the podcast recently about I have a lot of friends who I feel like start an agency every week, especially like when you graduate college, right? Like it's like, okay, I got here through an agent, now I'm going to do it myself. There's a lot of college soccer agencies out there. Why did you start off the ball? What was the mission? What was the purpose?
Yeah, it's honestly a really interesting question because when I started, I'll be honest, I wasn't sure what the purpose was. In a lot of ways, like I said, I was coming off a period of a major injury and it was kind of around the time period where I always wanted to do something to keep my mind occupied, especially because, for myself at the time, it was really difficult to accept. I'm going to a new environment, looking to play, and then I have, my first career major injury. So it was like, I kind of just did it at first, kept keep my mind occupied. And I realized as I began to do it, one, the wealth of experiences I had acquired and, how I could help players in that process. But I think a lot of it at the end of the day is I want to see players accomplish their dreams and achieve things that, I wasn't able to do because I didn't know a lot of the things that I know now. I think in a lot of ways as a player, I'm kind of a bit of a late bloomer. And, a lot of it was just because I didn't have the knowledge that I think was necessary to achieve what I wanted to achieve. And, I think for a lot of ways, my background is very relatable to players. Like my dad played at a very high level. He played at a Division 1 level at a very good program. His brother, his close friends played at a professional level. So it's like he obviously has a very good background, a wealth of knowledge that most parents here in the United States don't have. Yet he wasn't able to help me that much because the game in the United States has changed so dramatically. And it was just beyond his level of expertise. And I think that's something I've realized is, the game in the United States is evolving so quickly in so many ways. I think in so many ways we're catching up to the rest of the world, but in so many ways we're behind the rest of the world as I saw in my experiences abroad. And that was why I started, is I wanted to pass on those experiences of one, this is what it takes to get to the next level, whether it be college or now. Obviously, I have a level of knowledge that can, I think, help guys get to the professional level, but also this is what you need to develop. And I think so many players in the United States are underdeveloped in certain aspects, and they go into college and they're a level behind, and that can really be a detriment to their career because they might have the necessary talent, whether it be physical or technical, to achieve things at the college level. Yet they don't have this knowledge that is necessary. And I think those are the two biggest reasons. I wanted to help players gain that knowledge and also help players achieve the things that I wasn't able to achieve just because I lacked the knowledge.
What is the number one question that you get from players about how to get college soccer offers?
It's a good question. I think it's, what event should I go to? Who should I be emailing? A combination of that. I wouldn't say maybe it's one exact question, but it's kind of, I guess, in a broad sense, what do I need to do? Like they think it's so straightforward. They think it's, I need to go to this ID camp. I need to go to this showcase. I need to play this team and play well. And, I try to tell players, it's not that simple in a lot of ways. There are some programs, there are some places where, if you go to the right environment, whether it be an ID camp or, a tournament and you play out of your mind, yeah, it can work out that simple at the end of the day. Maybe you are genuinely walking away with a full off, like a full scholarship. It's incredibly rare for that to happen, or maybe you have the financial backing that, you can make something work. But in reality, I think it's not that linear at the end of the day. There are so many other things that go into it, especially in the modern college soccer landscape. But I would say it's some version of that question of what do I have to do to get offers.
What has been your biggest challenge in building off the ball?
I think capacity at the moment is the biggest challenge, and also lack of experience. I think it would be something between the two. I am lucky enough that I co-founded the company alongside my childhood best friend, who also has a wealth of knowledge and different experiences that even I'm not experiencing in the moment. That's been incredibly valuable recently in building this. And I don't think, and I'm glad I'm speaking to you on this, but I don't think that many people realize how hard it is to build a company of any capacity. It's easy at the start. You can place two or three players. Look at me. I'm sending a player to Michigan State, Virginia, whatever. Like, we had that period at the start where it's like, I had the connections, the knowledge to at least get my name in the door at these schools. And I was being able to advertise players that had the level. But, in reality, running a business is such a interesting phenomenon in this industry because, obviously you're looking to help as many players as you can, but, you have to provide for yourself as well. And, you learn so many things about just running a business that is incredibly difficult. And, in the current predicament I'm in my life, I have so many other things going on that it's been difficult in circumstances to, showcase that knowledge and truly maybe take off the ball to the places I want to take it just in the current moment. And, I think that's been valuable in the sense of I've learned that, when the time period comes, I'm going to give it everything I have when that's the time. And in terms of the knowledge and experience, you make so many mistakes along the way that, I genuinely don't think you can learn from without going through it. Like, you learn, things about obviously running a business, but also just general things about life. Like we've had so many failures in the early stage. We tried to run another ID camp for transfers in May. And, I was trying to run this elite showcase of only elite players. And, we failed. I'll be honest with you. We were supposed to play North Carolina FC. We were supposed to have, Wake Forest, NC State, Duke, all these top programs there. And, 2 weeks out, I was like, we don't have the players.
Mm.
Like, this is not going to be worth these coaches' time. And I had to call each coach and tell them, like, look, I failed. I had to call the director of the academy at North Carolina FC and say, like, this isn't going to work. And, in those moments, like nothing can replicate that at the end of the day. No work at a corporate level or no work as a intern for another business can go through those moments because at the end of the day, like you can't blame anyone but yourself in reality in those moments. Yeah, you can blame the players or whatever, this player screwed me over or whatever, but in reality, it's your fault because you made a mistake along the way. You did something. And unless you don't own it, there's no way to move forward. So that knowledge and those experiences, I think, are incredibly important in building a business, and you can't move forward without it. But you have to go through those moments to gain that knowledge, to gain that expertise of what to change in the future.
100%. And I remember when I saw I remember when I saw you release your transfer portal showcase, I was like, why didn't I think of that? That is such a good idea. I was like, you guys hit it the nail on the head. Like all the Division One, all the coaches are there in Indio at that event anyway. They have a day off on Thursday, so they're doing nothing. What a good idea to run like a showcase on that day. And I remember looking like I wish I was part of that. And I think I messaged you too about that, and that was a really, really good idea. And then it's interesting to hear about the North Carolina event, and I think obviously you've handled it in a really good way because probably there's a lot of companies that would have tried to have done that, failed, and kind of given up. And I think the fact you're still going obviously says a lot. The fact you took time to call the coaches and explain why rather than just saying, sorry, it's not happening, And I think that you guys are pretty respectful from kind of looking online and obviously speaking and knowing you, Cullen. And I think that's a really good quality is being a good person. And I think I talk to a lot of our players about like being a good person and being likable and how important it is. And whilst we're kind of on this topic of being honest, because I think a lot of like why one of the reasons why I started Select Generation was because there was a lot of feedback from other families, players that they were working with agents who weren't that honest or were struggling to kind of fully inform the player about the level, about their opportunities, etc. And they were a bit frustrated with the whole process. And on your point of kind of talking, being likable, being a good person, being transparent, how important do you think that being likable is? What am I trying to ask here? I'm trying to ask you, for you as a person and for your agency, do you think that the fact that you've been successful as opposed to probably some other people is because of the way that you handle things or how you are as people?
Yeah, I'm a huge believer that the success of an individual is 90% of how they are as a person at the end of the day. Obviously to reach whatever industry you're in, whether it's a footballer or whether you're working in the business side, you have to have a certain level of talent, especially at the highest possible levels. That's the reality of any aspect in life. Anybody who's successful in any capacity has a certain level of talent within that industry, but the rest is how they are as a human being in my mind, because, that's what separates the highest level of people in any industry. And I think you have to be likable, but you also have to be genuine in yourself and, a certain capacity at the end of the day. There are some people who I think are maybe put a more positive spin, and that's just naturally who they are. And there are maybe some people that maybe I wouldn't say negative, but are just more realistic in certain capacities. And I think you have to have that, and especially in an industry like we're in, because in reality, every single player, and this, comes in and says, I want to go to UCLA, I want to go to Duke, whatever it is. And the reality is 99.99% aren't at the level. And even the few that are, maybe they are able to get into the door, but we know how it is. You get there and you're like, oh, I'm not playing. I'm not happy again. And you have to be honest with the player. And you have to also tell them of, I'm being honest and I'm giving you my perspective. This is my experience. This is how I enjoyed it. But you
How,
also have to be honest of, where they are at in the level. You're good enough to play there, but you're not good enough to be a star. You're not good enough to have what you want.
how do you? I totally agree, and it's something that sometimes I struggle with as well because I'm speaking to the player and I'm thinking, right, this player, like I've told him I believe in him, I trust him, and I do, right? It's being genuine, being honest. And then there's some players that really just are shooting for the stars, right? They want to go to those types of schools, Wake Forest, Duke, NC State, Clemson. How do you communicate to that player that he is not at that level?
It's difficult because, there's no right answer to this question. And I think part of it comes down to
Try and go by, do you try and go by factual, like look at their roster, look, this is the player, the level that their players have played at, look at your level. Do you try and based on your opinion and your background, like how do you communicate if the player is clearly not at the level, right? He's playing not at an MLS Academy team, or he's not playing at a top ECNL, or he's not a transfer student. How do you communicate to that player that you are not at the level to go to the school that you want to go to?
I think the very first thing I always try to do is I try to read the person as much as I can to learn, how they accept feedback in a certain manner. Obviously, sometimes that's easier than others, and sometimes people just don't generally accept feedback. I think you have to come back at it at a certain level of knowledge in your background. This is my experience. I played at this level. This is my experience. I've worked with people at this level, and I think you also have to present them that it's not a linear process of, okay, being honest with you, you're not here right now. This, you may think you're here right now, but this level of the game is, a level above you right now. But I think you also try to show them that it's not impossible to maybe get there. It might be more difficult for some than others to get there. And, for some, maybe it might even be impossible. I hate to say it, but, I think you have to present them in a way of like, okay, you're not here right now. You can get here, but you have to make the right decisions, because this is not the right decision chasing this, school or chasing this level right now. You need to be at a level where you play, you'll be challenged, but you can also succeed, because that's the only way for you to eventually push and reach this level, is because as a human being, and I'm sure, you've looked into this and you probably even talked about it at some point, but, there's a certain point where you grow by pushing yourself outside your comfort zone and pushing yourself and challenging yourself every single day, but you have to have a certain level of success to build confidence and continue to grow. And you have to present it to the player in that aspect of this is the level you need to be at because this is the only way you're going to achieve something and also continue to challenge yourself so you can reach the levels you seek out.
Amazing, amazing. This is exactly the same advice that I give. Like, you might not be here. You might have to go to junior college, Division Three, Division Two, NEIA, and then maybe you'd be ready for this program. Like, you need to prove yourself as at a higher level. I completely agree with your advice, Cullen. And a question that I have for you is, if I'm a 16, 17-year-old, right, and I'm coming to you, Cullen, I haven't started anything yet. I don't know what I'm doing. How do I get a college soccer offer? Where do I start? What's the first step?
I would say the first step is genuinely trying to speak to as many people as you can that you know, whether that be speaking to a recruiting agency, speaking to a player that has been at the college level, because that gains you knowledge and then you can start to look at making decisions. I don't think enough people, I think a lot of people try to look up what they can on the internet, and obviously there's knowledge on the internet, but I don't think there's enough to be said for speaking to somebody, whether that be face to face or over the phone, to gain that knowledge to then base, start and try to make a decision on what you can to get there. But
If
I think, yeah, continue.
if I want to get a college soccer offer, what questions should I ask?
I think the first question you should ask is, how do I get there? And what I mean by that is, if you're speaking to a player, what did you do to get there? If you're speaking to an agent of, what does your process look like in some regard to get there? As a coach, what does the process usually look like to get there? And then I think from there, you can start to apply that knowledge and say, okay, I'm at this level. What should I be doing? Should I be looking to go to camp? Should I be looking to go to showcases, stuff like that? But I think it's impossible. I think that's where a lot of people make mistakes of before you accumulate any knowledge on the process to make decisions on how to get there.
Right. So you talk to college coaches about players. What do college coaches want when they say, Cullen, I need a player? What qualities, attributes, grades, financial packages? Like, if someone was to ask you, Cullen, what do college coaches want? What do they look for? What's your answer?
It's an interesting question because I don't think there's a one size fits all answer. I think the biggest answer I would give to a player is maturity. And that can apply to many different ways. Sometimes it's a physical maturity because sometimes they're looking for a certain physical profile because of, their conference or their style of play. But a lot of times I would say it's the mental profile. They're looking for a player that mentally is mature, whether that be he has the mental profile of coming in and he's able to play right away because of the experiences he's accumulated, or he has the mental profile to come in to realize that he's not good enough to play right away. And then he needs to improve every single day on the training pitch. I think in the modern college landscape, I think coaches are sick of players coming in and thinking they're the greatest thing ever. And, messing up the training environment or providing a poor attitude because that affects the team immensely. Especially in the college landscape where everything is about results, training players are incredibly valuable in those early stages. They test the players that are playing week in, week out. And, if you don't have that mental profile to be able to do that, you're putting yourself at a massive disadvantage.
Completely agree. Completely agree. Cullen, I've got five quick fire questions for you. All right. So like one word or one sentence answers if you can.
Yeah.
Um, what's the biggest mistake that players make in their highlight reels?
Not highlighting your best attributes first. Um, so many players put their best, whatever their best attributes are, 30, 40 seconds into the video. If you're fast, if you're athletic, put that at the start. And that applies to all other attributes. But you have to put your best abilities at the very start to catch a coach's attention.
If a college coach opens your email, what's the one thing that will make them reply?
It's a good question. I would say if you provide an of where a coach can see you play, you're more likely to get a response than anything else, whether that's a tournament, whether that's I'm coming to your ID camp, but you have to provide them an opportunity for them to see you play. Because if you don't, they'll be like, this is great, I need to see you play. And if you provide them that right there, that at least gives them the opportunity to understand of, okay, I can see this kid play there. I can then make a better evaluation.
How do I know if I'm good enough for D1?
I think more than anything else, it's are you competing at a level that sends players on to Division 1 level? Whether that's USL 2, where you are actually competing against Division 1 players, whether that's overseas at, an academy like your guys's or an E-Tour or something like that, or whether that's MLS Next. But if you're competing against other players that are either already at the Division 1 level or that are going to be at the Division 1 level, you'll know. I mean, some players might not be honest with themselves, but that's the only way to know is by competing against players that are going to be there or are already there.
If you were 16 again, what's one thing you do differently in the college process?
I would say start earlier more than anything else. Um, I think it's never too early to start. I think it's never too early to start accumulating knowledge and at the end of the day, testing yourself in whatever capacity that is, whether it's be playing against men, whether that's be going to ID camps, but it's never too early to start, to gain knowledge, to test yourself.
What is a red flag and a green flag when picking a soccer agency to work with?
I think the biggest green flag is speaking to other players and hearing their experiences and getting genuine feedback in that regard. You know, I think if it's possible, if you can speak to a player that's had a poor experience with that agency, I think, and they still speak highly in regards to certain aspects, that's a massive green flag if that's possible because you're speaking with a player that's, saying it didn't work out for me, but they still tried their best or they still did X, Y, and Z. And I think then of, okay, if I'm this agency, it doesn't always work out because sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it generally doesn't work out, but they've still tried their best. They can still do everything they can. That, in my opinion, is a massive green flag. A red flag, I think how much they sell themselves. And what I mean by that is, and it's true in the sales world as well, if they're pressing you to make a decision on something right away, I view that as a red flag because they don't feel like if they give you proper time to think, to speak to others, to gain any extra knowledge, they're worried about their product. And you see that in the sales world, you see that in any capacity. If somebody's rushing you to make a decision, they don't have the confidence in themselves that if they give you adequate time, they'll make the decision that they know is right.
Well, that's really good advice. I'm going to take note of that one. But yeah, Cullen, listen, I mean, that was an amazing episode. I think that's a proper episode that if you listen to, I think a lot of things will become clearer for you. And I tried to I think obviously your story at the start is really interesting. And I think I'm glad that you kind of opened up about your background and your story because that really gives perspective on why you're answering the way you're answering. And I think a lot of tips and tricks in there and just some genuine feedback of what you need to be doing and being realistic with your level. So, Cullen, I really appreciate your time. That was amazing.
Yeah, no, it was a pleasure to be on. And, like I said, I love what you're doing. I think the knowledge you're giving the players is incredible. And I also, what you guys are building is incredible. And it's been incredible to see it, from the time we first spoke, just over 2 years ago to see where you guys are now. It's incredibly inspirational for somebody that's looking to make that jump in a short time as well.
Perfect, Cullen. Top man. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, pleasure as always.